These M96 engines, there's a bad rap on the internet, but at the same time, you know, some things can be helped, some things can't be. And what we're here to do is we're trying to help those things that can be helped and make these engines survive for the next generation owners. Yeah, so when you brought me this car for a quick inspection, what we did was, hey, let's change the oil. I can drop the oil pan out of it at that point, and what I'm looking for is the chain guides for the variocam. Now these pieces of brown plastic, I'll find them in the oil sump. Now if it gets too bad, they'll start clogging up the sump intake so that you start starving the engine for oil. So what we're gonna have is, we come over here, and what we have, these are the 4 chain guides that we are gonna wanna look at. When we pull these cam covers off, this is why we pull the engine out of this car, because we're going to want to go in and look at these things. And you see these big nasty grooves cutting this thing? Well, that's not nearly as bad as a customer's car that we had in a while back. That this what's in this bag is what's left of one of the chain guides. So that's what it's supposed to look like. Warn, that's what it's not supposed to look like. So we find this stuff in the oil pan, and what happens is that means this piece has come apart and all this stuff has fallen down into the engine sump. Now when that happens, you have something. This is the variocam actuator. Now when those pieces fail, this variocam actuator now has a chain running on a metal foot, which this was supposed to be here instead. This is gone. Now you got a metal chain running on a metal foot, and what that does is you get these little slivers of metal, not aluminum, steel, going into the engine. Now, yes, they'll eventually get through the oil filter, but what do they go through before they get to the oil filter? So there's the rest of the engine system that, you know, you don't want those metal fragments floating through the engine. You don't want this to fail. These are anywhere from $900 to $1,500 a piece, depending on where you get your car serviced, per side. So what we don't want to do is, a lot of what we do around here is preventive maintenance so we don't have catastrophic engine failure. So, you know, I can't stress this enough. These are good, hardy motors. If you take care of these things like they should be taken care of, having your services done on time, oil changes done on time, having a qualified technician work on these engines, these things will last a lifetime. You know, these M96 engines, there's a bad rap on the internet, but at the same time, you know, some things can be helped, some things can't be. And what we're here to do is we're trying to help those things that can be helped and make these engines survive for the next generation owners. This is the chain tensioner, excuse me, for bank 1. It sits inverted. Now, like I said earlier, you'll notice that when you have the chain tensioner from bank 2, it sits like this. We pulls up here, O-rings there. On this one, we don't have that problem. This one sits inverted. O-ring here, we pull down here, it sits like this. This O-ring keeps the oil in this tensioner when this car sits for long periods of time. So this chain tensioner stays pumped up, has nice pressure on it. It's got a nice springy to it, it's really hard to push down. This one, on the other hand, sitting like this its whole life, this is compressed all the time. It's pushing oil out of that weep hole and it goes back into the crankcase. So after this car has sat for an extended period of time, like these cars have a tendency to do, when you crank it up first thing, you get a little rattle in it. What that is that it's this chain tensioner pumping up full of oil pressure right until it gets to here, pushing on that chain so that you don't have, so for the timing chain. And you have 3 things that happen when this does this over a long period of time. You'll either stretch a chain, it'll jump time, bend valves. You'll break a chain, which is catastrophic and it destroys the head, or it guts the IMS bearing out of it. Now all that jerk on that chain, every time that thing comes up and starting to pump up, is jerking this metal bearing. It's just a ball bearing. It's jerking on this bearing. And what happens is, over a period of time and a lot of startups, where you have a lot of time between startups, what this does is just keeps yanking on that bearing, and it's just a ball bearing. What eventually happens is it gets like this. It starts to get noisy, and I've had them where you pull these off, and there's metal slivers, all of this. It's all in the intermediate shaft, Eventually that can get into the engine. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to eliminate a lot of these problems that are out there on these engines. And a good understanding of why this happens will save a lot of owners thousands of dollars in the end. So one of the most important things that you can do is have your car inspected by a qualified Porsche technician, somebody who has experience working on these cars for a few years. And what they're going to do is they're going to start hunting around for things like this. So this change tensioner for bank 1, it's got a really thin flange on it. Now Porsche did update this chain tensioner, and you can notice it because they'll have a much thicker flange on it, almost twice as thick. So when you look up underneath the car, it's right up underneath here. It's not hard to find. And you look at that and say, okay, it's got a chain tensioner update to it. So okay, so chances are somebody's been in there, taking care of this motor, giving it some updates. Hopefully they've done an IMS at the same time. So and that's the biggest reason why Tim brought me the car, so that we could go through it, find out any problems it might have had or could have, and we're going to address those problems. And that's why we pulled the whole engine out of the car, so we can get all this stuff done at once, and hopefully he can have some worry-free driving for the next foreseeable future.
Support brands that support classic motorsports. Get your chemical solutions from CRC Industries. Visit crcindustries.com to learn more.